Welcome to Sewing Out Loud, the official podcast of Zede Sewing Studio. Here are your hosts, Zede and Mallory.
Sewing Out Loud. Hello and welcome to the podcast. I'm Mallory Donahue.
And Zede Donahue.
Well, she's Zede Donahue. I am not both people. Okay, yeah. So, Mom.
Well, sometimes.
I know. Sometimes
I know you know my Social Security number and you've used it.
No, I have to text you for it every time.
Do
True
you?
story. No,
Yeah.
I do not.
But you have pretended to be me in official ways.
Yes, I have. I've been like this. Yeah, okay. Anyway, well, we're going to start off this podcast with a little listener mail, and it's a prompt. And it's from @MapleStitch on Instagram. And she says, just wanted to say I listened to your podcast and really like the mother-daughter family dynamic. Keep it up. You guys are so interesting and love the dual generation perspectives. I would love it if you guys would make an episode that talks about a plan or a set of skills with pattern suggestions to go acquire garment sewing proficiency. I don't know where to start. Thank you both.
Ooh.
Well, thank you very much, Maple Stitch.
I can't believe she has that much confidence in us.
Yeah,
I love
thought
it.
it's really sweet. And I'll just say that from looking at her profile, that it looks like she's a quilter. There's a lot of like really cute, very accurately pieced like quilts and bags, and things like that, like patchwork. And I love all your fabric choices. Like she's got this gorgeous feed. So anyway, @MapleStitch on Instagram, and we are at Zede Sewing Studio on Instagram if you want to, tag us and ask us to record a podcast. So Mom, when I first read you that comment, you're like, oh, I don't know. And I would say let's do a quick rundown of some skills that you need for garment sewing. And I think that Maple Stitch will be pleasantly...
Is it maple or
like,
Mabel?
Maple, like maple syrup.
Yeah, okay, like the tree. Okay.
Yeah, and I think that she'll be surprised that she might already have a little bit of the foundation from her quilting background. Even though we say we're not quilters,
Right, but
you
you can always you transfer skills.
Right. So I think maybe patterns, and she asked for pattern suggestions.
Right.
Patterns are a thing we should talk about, but I think maybe let's start this little series off with cutting. Let's do an episode about cutting right now. Cutting out garment patterns and garment fabric.
Yes.
Okay?
And in a way, it probably is one of the most important things to start with, because how you cut that fabric, it's the first step in how well your garment's going to turn out.
Any tip you look up about garment sewing? If it's like, oh, do this and it'll be easy to bind your neck hole or da-da-da.
Right.
It all depends on accurate cutting first.
Right. You've got to cut.
If you don't cut it correctly first, and this is, like I said, I believe that people will say same thing for quilting. If you don't cut it out right, your block won't end up the correct size.
Right.
So your garment won't end up the correct size. And in garment sewing, Mom and I really like to use a rotary cutter to cut out both pattern pieces and out of pattern paper.
Right.
Okay. And our pattern pieces out of fabric.
I hardly use a shear anymore.
Yeah.
I have small scissors that I use, 4-inch type scissors,
Mm-hmm.
that kind of thing. One of my favorite pairs, actually, those were marketed as quilting scissors. That pair I had that has like the
spring,
the big size handle you can get your hand in, but then it only has like a 3-inch blade.
I
love those.
I will link to those scissors in the show notes. No, they're
they're easy to find. They're a little pair of scissors, so they're easy to find. They cut well. You can get your whole hand in it, and not just 2 fingers.
Right.
I'm falling in love with those scissors more and more all the time.
And so we use a rotary cutter, and what might be different a little bit from quilting here is that we'll use a rotary cutter without the aid of a ruler.
Right.
To cut out a curve.
In fact, I almost don't use it.
Right.
Now, probably the biggest difficulty on a rotary cutter when you're cutting out a pattern like that is an inside corner.
Yeah.
There are the small, are they 18?
28.
28?
Yeah,
Okay,
so
yeah.
kind of a normal, quote-unquote, normal-sized rotary blade is
Right.
45
That,
millimeters.
do you know that 28 was the very first rotary cutter I ever had?
I
That was
didn't
like
know
the
that.
first size they came in.
So the 28
Yeah.
are kind of what is termed the small
Right, and
size
that was before you were
nowadays.
born, like a long time
So I
before you
don't
were
know
born.
about it.
Yeah, yeah, it was a long time, and we had Teflon cutting mats that like didn't heal well.
Sealed off,
They
yeah.
got sliced up.
Yeah.
But anyway, for inside corners, somebody may want that smaller blade. The other thing is you might need a little pair of shears or nips for inside corners. I don't. Okay, I'm at the point where honestly I don't need those anymore. When someone says, "Oh, how do you cut out that curved neck?" Or that arm hole, the arm size round, and you've got a rotor. Well, honestly, if you know anything about math or physics, a round neck can be cut out better with a round blade than a straight blade.
Right. In fact, I'll say this. I mean, I look like an idiot trying to cut out a curve with scissors.
You know what? Your skills, your skills have to be better.
Yeah,
And-
well,
and
but
the other-
I mean,
right.
there are people who cut out curves with scissors better than me. I have trouble cutting out curves
Because
with
you
scissors.
because you never had
Yeah,
to.
because I always did it with a rotary
Right.
cutter.
And the other thing you need to know is that when you're cutting a pattern with shears, you have to, or a pattern, I'm sorry, the fabric and the pattern.
A pattern piece.
You have to put the blade under the fabric and you're lifting the fabric up and you don't get as precise a cut. When you're using the rotary cutter, it stays down on the mat and you're just coming from the top and you get a better cut.
That's my big thing.
Oh, I know.
That's my biggest thing. I'm like,
Well,
I get to leave it.
And speed.
Yes, I get to leave it there. And once again, I mean, if somebody saw me cut out a pattern with a pair of scissors, I looked bad because I'm used
Preschool.
to and they get jagged and stuff.
Right.
And so
there is a definite skill to using shears.
it's not like
and it's something you have to develop.
Yes.
And it is a skill. I probably still have it because I cut so many years with it. I didn't start cutting garments. It was probably about. I started transitioning, I'd say, in 1980 to the rotary cutter, and I would say by 85, I wasn't using shears anymore.
Yeah, and the rotary cutter does have a couple quote unquote like limitations. You do have to have a mat to cut on.
Right.
So
you need a surface area.
So if somebody doesn't have a mat,
Right.
That's important. But accurate cutting, I mean, when we say, hey, you got to cut accurately, the rotary
Right.
cutter can really help you.
And you can't get anything any sharper.
Yeah, and when you
can also cut your finger off better than with a pair of scissors.
you got
That's
it.
for sure.
It is more dangerous.
Right.
Make sure to always retract your blade, or get that Olfa rotary cutter where you squeeze it, to expose
They
that
used
blade.
to not retract.
Right. Yeah, get one with a retractable blade. Make sure it's retracted, especially before you put it in the drawer.
Right. Well,
Somebody
and you
did that
lock
to
it
me.
when you put it in the drawer.
Somebody did that to me the other day at the
and you
shop.
lock it. There's usually a way to lock the blade safety before you put it in the drawer. And it should be the only thing in the drawer where you keep it.
Yeah.
So that, you're going into the sharps
The
drawer or
cutting
whatever.
implements drawer.
Right.
Yeah.
And you want a really sharp blade. You don't want a crappy blade. You want to pay attention to how you take it apart to change the blade so you can put it back together. And we need to do a video on that. It's so simple. My father used to work with small electronics, and he taught me this procedure, and I will teach it to you.
Okay, we'll definitely do that.
It's a perfect.
So when you cut out the garments accurately, the other thing about laying out pattern pieces onto a garment, which I think probably, we're talking to somebody kind of like Maple Stitch here, who's obviously cut out quilt patterns before. I don't like to pin pattern pieces to the fabric, and because you don't.
Well, and the reason, again, time.
Uh-huh.
The other thing is, as soon as you pin, you're distorting the fabric.
Right.
You want to use pattern rate. Now, when I
Pattern weights.
When I will say the only time I use pins when I am cutting is if I'm trying to match a plaid, match a stripe, or something like that.
Sure.
And what I pin is I pin the fabric and not the pattern to it, because I've got 2 layers.
Yeah.
Now, there are some schools of thought, and this is not a bad school of thought, especially for a beginner, is when you're cutting plaids or stripes or something like that in a garment and you want to match them, don't cut on the fold. Cut each piece out. So, like you made everybody do in the jeans class.
Yeah, and
So you
Yeah.
you're matching the pattern. Now what I do is I make sure when I'm putting, layer on top of layer that those patterns are matched.
Yep.
And that's what I'm pinning together.
yeah, but you're pinning together the
Fabric only.
pattern of the fabric together, not and then laying that,
Right.
that pattern on top.
But I would think often you would be taught by people who teach garment sewing. If it's a plaid, don't cut it on the fold.
Yeah, cut it separately.
Right. Cut it, cut the whole piece so you can see how it's going to come out and all of that. I rarely do that anymore, but I wonder how many garments I've made in my lifetime.
Right.
I actually just saw a photo that was 49 years old. Okay. It was my cousin's baby shower. She has a child that's 49 years old. And I'm sitting there in a dress I made that I hand monogrammed. Like, but it actually, the style's back, everybody.
Yep, I was
probably
going to say,
still
you're
have
ahead
that
of your
pattern.
time, yeah.
But it was a seersucker, shift, which people are wearing these days. But it's kind of funny that I was like, oh, there I am in a dress I made.
Well, and for the Rotary Cutter business that we're talking about, we're big advocates of this.
Right.
A lot of times people bring up the objections to the Rotary Cutter. It's about the curves, and we just talked about how really curves should be easier with the Rotary Cutter once you get used to it. The other thing I hear is oh, the fabric slips and slides, or when you cut out knits with the Rotary Cutter, it pushes it out of the way, or something. And I'm like, same thing with scissors.
I was going to say, scissors do the same thing.
The same thing happens with scissors. The same challenges come up with scissors. So if you can get a Rotary Cutter and you can get a sizable cutting mat that's big enough to cut out things like sleeves and pant legs and shirt fronts and stuff, then I just highly suggest starting off with trying that. And maybe, I know you're about to say something. Maybe what I'd say about pattern suggestions, I think a pair of PJ pants.
Oh, yeah, that would be nice.
It's a really good thing to start cutting because it's kind of straight with just the curve for the crotch, you know. So and when I say PJ pants, we know that nowadays those are slacks,
People wear those
people are wearing
to Walmart all the time.
People are wearing PJ pants, and off the top of my head, I know there's some indie pattern that's, I think, I can't remember who it's from, but I will post to it. There are a lot of people making these kind of real lightweight
I'm
PJ
wearing
pants,
them.
and you're wearing them.
I actually just had some surgery on my leg.
Uh-huh.
And, of course, wearing a dressing and all this. And tight pants or like leggings or something, or even tight jeans were okay, except I had this big lump then on my thigh that
attractive.
No one knew was a dressing. They just thought I had a big lump on it. But I was wearing something that, very much people would think was a PJ pants.
Right.
But those loose fitting trousers are very stylish. A lot of them in the big prints or the
and they're making them out of those lightweight rayons or the
Right.
lightweight knits or something.
and they feel pajama-y.
Yeah,
they really
do.
do.
They do feel pajama-y, but then when you make them out of a print that sort of is, I don't know. I'm trying to say that somehow people make them not look like pajama pants, but then they do.
Well, a lot of them are sort of ethnic prints or boho-ish.
Yeah.
There's a big trend with boho to be sophisticated boho, not just boho.
I don't even like
who
the
knows?
word boho. I don't
Well, sophisticated boho would be sort of loose pants, but I think it's cleaned up a little bit, so to speak.
Boho sophisticate.
Right.
So anyway, starting out with that pattern, but were you going to say something about shifty fabrics and knits
Well,
and stuff
I
with the Rotary
guess
Cutter?
the other recommendation that I have seen before is things with a high pile or like furs, faux furs, not to cut with rotary cutters because now you're talking about cutting one layer of fur always, especially with that high pile, and you're supposed to cut from the back side, right?
Not the furry side.
Not the furry side, from the back side. And people say, well, it's because it sticks in your mat and it'll never come out. That's true. It will. But I can put down paper on my mat and then cut. And believe me, if you're making 55, mouse costumes or something, you will do that.
Right.
So, and when people say the pattern, things shift and everything, and you're absolutely, and chiffons, there's tricks to those things also. And it goes along with shears or the rotary cutter. You put tissue paper between the layers, or you put tissue paper underneath. Oftentimes you need to do that, the fabric you're working with. I know that like a polyester shear oftentimes wants to do that stick in the mat
Get
thing.
stuck to the mat. Yeah.
Yes. The fibers are being pushed down into the mat
Yep.
instead of getting cut. If your rotary cutter is really sharp, it probably won't happen. But, as you're cutting, of course it dulls. And the thing is that you can put down like a tissue paper or something. Will that dull your blade? Well, of course it
Everything
will.
dulls
And
your
cutting
blade.
your fabric
Yeah.
dulls your blade, and just running it on the mat dulls your blade, as well as your shears. When you cut the fabric, that dulls. Okay, let me blow everybody's mind here, and let's see how many people disagree with this. There's the rule: don't cut anything but fabric with your sewing scissors,
Yep.
right? And you've heard it all your life. Don't touch my shears. Don't touch my sewing scissors.
Right.
It's kind of a myth. It's kind of a falsehood. But because you can cut paper with your sewing shears. It won't hurt them. In fact, one way to sharpen your scissors is to cut aluminum foil.
Right.
It will take care of, the little
Nicks
sometimes the
and
little
micro nicks
dings,
and stuff,
micro nicks in your. The rule is to keep people away from your sewing shears, because you don't want to cut something like a wire or anything that will put a big ding in those blades that's irreparable, that
Right.
you can't take care of. So the rule is good. But if you are in your sewing studio or your sewing room or whatever, and you want to cut a piece of, say, wrapping paper, right? It won't hurt your shears.
Right.
It will not hurt them.
The other tip with squishy fabrics like knits, and I've been cutting out a lot of stretch denim lately for these jeans. You never want to put your hand in front of your rotary cutter anyway.
Ever, ever, ever.
Anyway, but a lot of times when we get started, I'll have a client, cut into the fabric a few inches and then put their hand behind the rotary cutter and hold, what they've made the fabric into two pieces right now. Hold those two pieces right there and continue cutting.
That's correct.
And it's a little bit, not a pull from the back, but just a little bit of stability.
Stabilization.
Yeah, stabilization from the back, and it helps that not to pull. And I did that with Joyce the other day, and she was like, whoa.
Right. And sometimes if your weights are really good, it's fine. And maybe you'll only have to hold the piece of fabric that's not weighted down.
Yeah,
that's
what happens
too.
to me a lot.
Right.
Yeah.
And speaking of weights, while we're at weights, there are fabric weights you purchase per se. That's what they're called. They're in the stores. Big, huge washers work. Cans of tuna, cans of cat food.
Yeah, anything that's heavy.
Anything that's heavy, your shears laid down.
We like those Zirkle pin cushions. They're pretty expensive pattern weights, but they really are nice.
Well, and then there's things that will curve a little bit that are good,
Yes.
Those kinds of things. The other thing that we have now that we can start using again is sometimes you'll have a drawer pull or a cabinet pull that if you take that's heavy, because I redid my kitchen, so now we have
it's like a bag of them.
We have like a bag of 22, and they're like just little knobs, and they have a flat and if you take the screw out, they are perfect.
Perfect for pattern weights.
Perfect pattern weights.
I didn't even think about that.
Yeah, and I in the past, I'd use those. And the other day, I saw those. I thought, why don't I have those up in the studio? If I ever want to use them for pulls again, I can. But right now, I can use them as pattern weights.
So I think that for this prompt about a set of skills, that cutting is a really good place to start. Do you have anything else to add about cutting?
I guess the one really important thing, and I don't know how we could forget this with the cutting table sitting there.
Like right there.
Yeah. It's like really big.
Like we can touch it.
Yeah. Is sometimes when you're using a rotary cutter, the ergonomics of it is very important, and you want your weight on top of that blade that you're using. Don't push it. You want your weight on top of it. You're pushing down and forward.
Don't just
Right.
push forward.
You're
push
pushing down also.
Good point.
If you're short, like me,
Like me.
you might need a stool to make sure you are over the pattern, which I needed also with shears. The other thing you might do is you might crawl up in the middle of your cutting table.
What?
And I've been caught in that position many times. But
the
so the ergonomics is important.
The other thing about the ergonomics is, sometimes we have to crawl up on the cutting table to do stuff because our cutting table's real big. But do treat yourself to some kind of table that's not the floor.
Right. The other
It's
thing,
hard to cut on the floor.
And the other thing I've had people say to me, "Oh, my hand gets so tired when I use the rotary cutter," and I'm thinking, "Well, mine got tired when I used the shears too."
Yeah.
But the other thing is, actually, the same person you saw, I watched her one day, and I said, "Okay, Joyce, you're inefficient.
Mm-hmm.
Do it." And again, she said, "Whoa!" And she's just learning.
Yeah, she's just
so
learning.
it's kind of nice when you're transferring skills to someone, and you're like, "Oh yeah, I remember when I did it like that." I can help her out, and she was amazed. All I did was have her move her hand a little bit, and it took pressure off of her fingers, and she was more putting her shoulder into it and not just her hand.
Private rotary cutting lessons with Zede are $75 an hour. No, I'm kidding. But yeah, I would say
They might be more than that.
Oh, okay. 105. No, yeah, sure. Anyway, so make sure and set yourself up for success with cutting because it's the foundation
Right.
of the garment sewing. And I think the next thing that we should talk about for next week's episode is pattern mechanics, how garment patterns work. So that'll be coming up.
Flat pattern for a lumpy round body.
Something like that.
Yeah.
And so anyway, that'll be the next episode in this series of episodes with about garment sewing skill sets. Okay?
Absolutely.
Are you in it with me, Mom?
I'm there.
All right.
I'm doing it. I'm doing it.
Well, thank you for listening. If you have any questions for us or you want to prompt us to do a podcast topic, you can get in touch with us at sewingoutloud.com. You can email me at mallory@sewhere.com, or you can find us on Instagram. We're at Zede's Sewing Studio. Thanks for listening.
So long and so happy.
Thanks for listening to Sewing Out Loud. For even more expert sewing advice, visit cutterHERE.com.